So just to review, now we've got the even simpler approach. Oops. The even simpler approach is to drop the span tag. So you can just put the type and the query directly on the TD element. So you don't even need to have any contents of that. Bib Template will automatically go through the MARC XML record. We haven't specified what sort of format we want, so it's automatically going to take MARC XML. It goes through the MARC XML record for the record that's being displayed, pulls out all the 504s, and automatically says, just give me all of the text contained within that particular MARC XML element concatenated together. So if that data field has, say, 10 subfields to it, it's just going to put all the text together in one string and then display that in your cell. And if you do have multiple tags that match, so you've got, say, multiple 500 general nodes, say, then those will just appear on separate lines within the cell on the right-hand side. So you'll just have general contents note or general note on the left-hand side, a single cell, and then multiple lines on the right-hand side going down. So it does, I think, what you would want it to do. So to get a specific MARC subfield, so here's an example of where we want to say just the 586A, because 586 might have all sorts of other fields which you don't want to actually display to users. The awards note, it's pretty simplistic. You take the query attribute, you still identify the data field, tag equals 586, and then add a space, and you can say the subfield contained within that data field with the attribute code equals A. So it's going to limit it to just those portions of the record. There was I'm not sure it's still in the example. I think we might have cleaned it up in 1.60. Some of the initial examples that we used with Bib Template had a greater than sign, which indicated sort of a parent-child hierarchical relationship. It's not necessary, and our good friend Internet Explorer dies on it, just sort of throws up. So if you see the greater than signs, you can get rid of them, basically, for any sort of parent-child relationship. So that's advanced. Well, that's sort of the advanced basic. You can get down to the individual subfield level. All right. So those are all the defaults that we've been using. So to sort of run over a review. And are people following things so far? Good, good. Is everybody comfortable with like getting into the XML and modifying the XML? Have you looked at some of your files before? Yeah. I'm trying to make it an easy to follow recipe to get through. So I see lots of nodding. If questions pop up in the mailing list after, that's cool. We've had questions before. I think Robert Sulier had asked some questions that actually helped expose a lot of this to the list, so we can keep that going. So you can tag really any element with the type equals opaque slot data, and that's just going to be a hint to Bib Template when Bib Template runs after the initial record display has been loaded. It's going to say, okay, something special is going on here. You're going to have a query attached to it to do something fun. Bib Template then runs that CSS selector based on the query attribute. So you need to know the CSS3 selector syntax. It's documented somewhat in the Dojo documentation, actually reasonably well in the Dojo documentation, also documented in the W3C standard for CSS3, also documented in JSQuery. They're almost all sort of the same approach. There are some limitations though. We're using the Dojo toolkit as our JavaScript framework, so it doesn't support all of CSS3, and the Dojo toolkit documentation makes it clear which attributes it does not support. So based on that query attribute, Bib Template will return a node list, which is a set of XML elements or nodes. There's a slight difference between the two of them, but that's a list of nodes with the, I think the variable name item, which you can then process within, if you have a type equals opaque / slot format script tag, you can take that item variable and iterate over it, do magical things to it. So you can get a very broad selection of nodes and then iterate over those nodes and say ignore the ones you don't care about specifically and do other things to the ones you care about within it. And if there's no script, then so you don't have a script tag within the table cell or wherever you're displaying it, typically a table cell, then Bib Template by default just says take all the text that's contained within that node list, concatenate it all together, and display that. So one of the things that really bugged me as I added more and more and more of these rows, because our reference assistants and public catalog people really wanted all kinds of data to display, is that as you add more and more rows, I think we're up to like 30-ish or more rows, by default you're going to get a blank space for everything where you don't have a match within the corresponding MARC XML record. So I wanted to figure out how to hide the rows that don't actually have any data to display. So the approach that I took was to use the sort of the existing within Evergreen, it's not a paradigm, that's too much of a fancy word, the existing approach of just adding a class with the attribute value hide me to which sets the CSS, I think visibility none, and display hidden attributes. One of the two of them, I forget which one. Start out by having the class set to hide me for each row that's being displayed in the record results. So then what happens is, say for this bibliographic node example that we're using, where we're pulling in the 504, here's the script tag that I was talking about that's contained within the table cell, within the type equals opaque slot data element to be exact. Script type equals opaque slot format says, okay, take a look. The first thing I'm going to do is find my tag equals, find the element where the ID equals tag 504. That's what this dojo.query is saying. And remove the class hide me from it. Effectively saying, okay, if I've gotten to this point, it means that I've found a 504 tag. I've found a match for this query. So I'm running the script. If there are no matches for this query, then this script is not going to run. So if I've got to this point, I can say, I can go ahead and show this row. So the first thing it does is say remove class hide me, which then makes it display by default. And then all that I'm doing here is returning the value of span, returning a little bit of HTML that again contains the concatenated content of the 504 tag, just wrapped in a span with a BR tag to introduce a line break. This is effectively what Bib Template does by default if you don't have a script. So I'm just kind of recreating that to then return that content as the value of this table cell to replace it dynamically on load. Does that make sense? Yeah. It took me a while to figure out how to do this properly, but it works nicely, I think. So on the previous page, you saw that CDATA thing that was hanging out here that kind of wraps the contents of the script. The reason that I'm doing that is because Evergreen has the web server has a module called XMLEnt that goes through and actually modifies all the content that it serves up. And that can sometimes run into fun and frolic if it modifies, say, JavaScript that you're not expecting it to modify. So the CDATA says, don't even touch this, it's character data. Just pass it through and the web browser will be able to read it as reasonable JavaScript. There are other ways of accomplishing this, but it's the way that I've been using it. It works quite nicely, so happy about that. And then this is just reiterating that the script gets the variable named item with the node list, and everything else is just ye old JavaScript. All right. So that works for the vast majority of cases where we want to show all the content that's contained by a tag. There are cases where you don't want to show things like the 652 subfield, which is just I think an alphanumeric string that talks about the source of the subject heading. I credit having been forced to create this presentation to be forced to figure out how to not display that, which is kind of nice. So we had been displaying this by default because it's just like, I've got too many other things to do. I'm just going to, let this stuff display. If people want to click on it and get a really fine-grained search result, they can.